Welcome to this week's recap and game plan ahead. First, we'll take a quick look back at last week's price action across a few core names. Then, we'll go through this week's expected moves and what traders should be watching. It's been an exciting week for Micron. On Monday, MU reacted strongly from its lower weekly expected move, making a sharp V-shaped recovery after the initial drop, bouncing back quickly. But that strength didn't last. The stock eventually rolled over, dropping and reacting from the next week's expected level around 95.18. Looking at the weekly chart, we've simply come back to the 5 EMA. And here's the key point. For the first time since April, MU closed below the 20 SMA. After previous week's extended drop to the 3 standard deviation level, Palantir carved out a sharp V-bottom. Last week, the stock bounced strongly, climbing all the way back toward the levels the options market had priced in for early August. PLTR high of the day was beyond 3 standard deviation to the upside, finally closed at 129.3, which is almost a full 3 standard deviation move to the upside. In context, that means price has traveled from touching the extreme downside 2 weeks ago to nearly reaching the extreme upside last week. A rare swing that highlights just how volatile the current environment for Palantir is. ON Semiconductor's price action last week stayed within its implied range between 81.8 and 99.5. After the prior week's drop, the stock held well inside its weekly expected move, almost approaching the upper boundary at 99.5. The bounce was capped as resistance came in right at the 5 EMA, preventing a full breakout beyond the expected range. TXN, after Friday's sell-off, Texas Instruments bounced from the lower Bollinger Band. The move reclaimed the upper weekly expected level at 304.5, and price reacted right from that zone. Worth mentioning, there's still an open gap down at 238, which at some point will likely be filled. AMD kept its price action contained between the 20 SMA and the upper Bollinger Band. Midweek, the stock reached the level that the options market had priced in for July 10th. By the end of the week, it closed right on top of the 20 SMA, staying well within its implied range. NVIDIA found support right at its weekly lower expected move, which coincided with the lower Bollinger Band. Price action is still being held down by the downward-sloping 5 EMA. Overall, the stock closed the week within its implied range. Microsoft retested its lower weekly expected move on Monday, coming down almost to 356.5. From there, the stock found strength and rallied all the way to its upper weekly expected move at 389.5, closing the week slightly above that level. Price now sits right at the 20 SMA, which could act as resistance or serve as the launch point for a new run, following the selling pressure we've seen since the beginning of June. Netflix made a strong move this week, pushing all the way to its 2nd standard deviation on the upside. Similar to Microsoft, the rally stalled right at the 20 SMA, where price found resistance. It's important to note that Netflix remains in a clear daily downtrend, despite this bounce. And with earnings scheduled for July 16th after the market close, we'll be sure to update on the implied moves as traders position ahead of the report. Block, ticker XYZ, stayed within its expected range last week. The stock made an attempt to reach the upper implied move at 81.5, but was rejected. Price remains capped by the upper Bollinger Band, yet the broader trend has been to the upside since mid-June. DraftKings, ticker DKNG, held above the 5 EMA throughout the week, while finding resistance at the 20 SMA. Price stayed right in the middle of its expected range. In hindsight, strategies like a short strangle would have worked well in this type of setup. This is not financial advice. It's shared purely for educational purposes only. For this week, expiring July 10th, market price in following implied moves. Each of them are 1 standard deviation. You can easily plot these levels directly on your chart from the platform. Simply click an icon and update directly on TradingView. If you want to extend further, the platform provides direct access to the 2nd and 3rd standard deviation ranges as well. Starting with SBY, the options market is pricing a 1.28% move, plus or minus $9.5 in either direction. That sets a one standard deviation range between 735.28 and 754.28. For AMD, the implied move sits at 8.27% or $42.8 either way. Range runs from 475.02 on the lower side up to 560.62 on the upper. Turning to NVIDIA, ticker NVDA market priced in around 4.29% expected move, which is $8.35. One standard deviation band, 186.48 to 203.18. Microsoft, ticker MSFT, options are pricing a 4.1% swing, plus or minus $16. That puts the range between 374.49 and 406.49. For Google, ticker Google, the implied move is 3.86%, about $13.9 in either direction. Range from 346.01 up to 373.81. Tesla, ticker TSLA market expects a 5.2% move, which translates to $20.45 plus or minus. 1SD range, 373.0 to 413.9. Netflix, ticker NFLX, options priced in 3.9%, roughly $3.03 either way. That gives us a range between 74.62 and 80.68. Palantir, ticker PLTR, the implied move is 6.03% or $7.8 in either direction. Range sits between 121.5 and 137.1. For Amazon, ticker Amazon market priced in around 4.02% expected move, plus or minus $9.75. One standard deviation range, 232.92 to 252.42. Texas Instruments, ticker TXN options are pricing a 7.22% move, which is $21.15 either way. Lower bound at 271.93, upper at 314.23. On semiconductor, ticker ON, the expected move is $8.65 in either direction, roughly 9.48%. That sets a trading range between 82.57 and 99.87. DraftKings, ticker DKNG, plus or minus $1.5 this week, about a 5.79% implied move. Range between 24.39 and 27.39. Micron Technology, ticker MU, the options market is pricing plus or minus $125.05, a 12.82% expected move. One standard deviation range stretches from 850.51 to 1,100.61. Block, ticker XYZ, market priced in 74.59 to 83.07, about a 5.38% swing, plus or minus $4.24. And Marvell, ticker MRVL, the implied range was 216.59 to 273.99. Roughly an 11.7% move, $28.7 in either direction. We can apply those levels directly on our chart, simply by clicking the icon that copies 3 standard deviations for the ticker this week, and then paste them straight into our custom indicator. That gets us visual representation of up to 3 standard deviations moved directly on our chart. Each standard deviation level represents a probability range for stock closing within that move by week's end. The first standard deviation covers about 68% of cases, 2 covers roughly 95%, and 3 about 99.7%. The 8% chance price closes the week within that range. 2 standard deviations, 95% chance of a weekly close inside. Only about 5% chance price closes outside that wider band. 3 standard deviations, 99.7% inside. Roughly 0.3% chance of closing outside, a true tail event. Now, it's important to understand what these implied moves actually represent. They don't tell us the direction in which price will head. Instead, they give us an idea of how much the market has priced in for potential movement over a given period of time. Traders can use this information in different ways, depending on their time frame and trading style. Whether it's positioning for a bounce near an expected level or taking a directional stance for a day trade or swing trade, the key is that implied moves provide a framework rather than a forecast. But remember, These levels are not guarantees. Price can and often does break through them. A good example was Micron last week. The stock initially reacted to its implied level, only to break it later in the week. That's why every approach should be taken with caution and backed by proper risk management.